MadLab Performance presents The Lab Podcast. Here's your host and chief mad scientist, Dan Gilbert.
Hello and welcome everybody to The Lab. I'm sitting here with Alec, Bulat, executive producer, fitness coach. Alec, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. Staring at the camera today, just decided to do something a little bit different. Little finger guns.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
There you go.
Very original. Very original.
Yeah.
Jack Flowers, you join us again. QB guru, fitness coach, knower of all things.
Again, that's a stretch, but thank you. I'm happy to be here, especially for this topic.
Well,
It'll
we're
be a
all
good
about
one.
mobility here.
We brought you because of the knower of all things portion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll try my best.
Okay.
Today, gentlemen, we're talking football.
Foosball.
And we love that foosball. But before that,
Yes.
we need to talk about our sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by FNX Fitness. If you're looking for a supplement company that will help you rise up, look no further than FNX Fitness, with products ranging from recharge to help amp up your workout, restart for your AM protein blend, and rebalance for all your super green needs. Alec loves that one. Whether it be gaining muscle or just looking to live a healthier life, FNX will help you get there. For 15% off of all FNX products, use the code MadLab. That's a capital M, capital L. Make sure you put that in at checkout, and let's get you one step closer to all of your nutritional goals.
Nice.
Thank you so
Well
much.
done.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Other way.
I'm going to break it
I'll
that
say,
way.
Don't snap my
All
computer,
right,
please.
let's put this down here. Wolf dog, don't step on that. This is the wolf dog. Once again, no explanation.
She looks so comfortable right now.
I don't think she looks conscious.
She's not conscious.
She's not, yeah.
It would be why. Gentlemen, football.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's talk some. So I think that we've talked sports specific exercises before. We've talked sports and athletes before. I think that football is an interesting game because of how complex it is. You have 11 on 11. It's not just 5v5. A lot of people are doing much different things on the field. So I want to kind of dial in and figure out what some of these positions should be doing outside or off of the field to better themselves on the field.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, man. I think it's important. I think that's, as you were saying, there's such a distinct difference between positions on the field, right?
For sure.
I mean, we'll go into this very soon, but linemen are very different than running backs and et cetera, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's something, I mean, maybe you can find it in basketball too, but just the variance in body size and body shape and I guess just that generally in the sport of football is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Second only to maybe NBA. You see some pretty cool comparisons with Yao and Spud Webb and stuff like that, but you can definitely get that with football
Spud Webb
too.
reference. I love it.
Turn up. Yeah.
there you go, man.
And just so we're clear, gentlemen, I think no matter what sport you're going to play, there are some foundational exercises, some ways that you need to be able to move with resistance and with some power that are just across the board, almost like non-negotiable, right?
100%.
We want to be able to squat well. We want to be able to hinge well. We want to be able to pull and push horizontally. We want to be able to pull and push vertically, right?
Yep.
We want to be able to do some unilateral stuff for sure. Everybody should be able to sprint with good form. So all of those we're not going to go, running backs need to sprint forward. We know this.
Right.
But every position should be able to sprint. Everybody should be able to get triple extension and do those things. We're not going to go, all right, safeties, barbell squat, right? Everybody should be able to get under a barbell if you're on a football field, especially if you're trying to be competitive, right? So we want to be able to do those with resistance. Is that all? Are we all in agreed?
Yeah,
100%.
so.
I feel like,
There.
I guess the question I had initially for you all is, of the overarching lifts, do you think one's most important? I have a couple buddies who are still in football. My brother was playing at Salisbury, so I asked him. And I have a buddy who coaches D2 down in Texas too, just what they think would be some, just the general best lifts for football players. And they immediately got into cleans and stuff. So even before that, I guess kind of backtracking, you mentioned squats.
Yeah.
I think for football specifically, being able to deadlift and being able to hinge properly is a huge one as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Interestingly enough, kind of back to our last week's conversation, I don't know if I would actually say cleans are exactly necessary.
Agreed.
Right?
I agree with that.
I think hinging is. I think the ability to hinge is completely necessary.
And hinge with power.
Yeah,
there's
hinge with
lots of
power.
ways to develop power through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's the part that people get they misinterpret is they think the clean is like the only way to develop that type of hinge power, right? But it's just not the case. They just, they aren't really aware of the different exercises that you can do to replicate that type of motion, right?
And I think a lot of power that you're generating on the football field is unilateral in nature anyway, right? Yeah. So like you might do something you could do like you could do really like a sled push, right? And for power. So you could do like a short sprint or something like that, or you could do like a band resisted single leg jump onto another leg, or you could even go bilateral and do like a broad jump that way. So just much simpler, easier uses of your time than teaching clean to a bunch of players at the same time. And I think the clean is a great exercise, but an end all be all. I don't see it as much. I agree with you with that.
Yeah, I would say squatting is hierarchy wise, right? Squatting is a more important motion to know than the clean, for sure. I would think you would agree with me on that one.
Yeah, it teaches you how to create those angles at a pretty simplistic level. And also, you can add a lot of resistance without nearly as much cueing and coaching and danger to the person. Not saying those things don't exist with a squat, just not nearly as much as a clean.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it teaches a lot of great core control, good foot stability. So all of those things, yeah.
You mentioned unilateral movements, and the first thing that popped into my head is core control as an athlete, especially with so many. It's just such an open chain sport. Anything can happen at any time. Being able to stabilize, especially in those kind of split stance unilateral positions, is enormous. So just really wanted to make sure not to overlook core in favor of maybe some of these more compound movements. Like it's pretty cool that like squats and deadlifts are kind of synergistic in that in some ways getting better at one can help you get better at another. But I feel like it's really important to emphasize one, unilateral movement, but even more importantly than that, I think, is just general core strength and stability, especially for football.
Or at least an understanding of the core so that people can use their core in different lifts as well. So sometimes I think that your core specific movements help you understand what your core should be doing in your more complicated lifts. And then sometimes you don't have to program as many of them to a certain point. Like there's a threshold with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I don't know, maybe I might be alone on this one, but I think that if you know how to brace correctly and you know how to do like good core control during bilateral motions like the squat and the deadlift, you are going to get that development in the same respect.
For sure.
Right? And so, I mean, it's not like after a certain point, I guess you don't have to just train like 50 different plank variations, right? And I think almost as to kind of your point though, Jack, is that there's a certain point where it's really more important to kind of just work on those unilateral motions, like let's say single leg squats, right? For instance, we'll take that as an example, and being able to brace and stabilize yourself through lumbo-pelvic hip complex. I'm just going to throw that big one out there. Basically, your trunk as a whole during those types of motions, right? So,
especially I didn't even have to go in there and tell the general public what you were talking about. So
yeah,
you
right.
You did it on your own.
Exactly. I caught myself.
We're evolving. We're evolving.
Impressive vernacular, I must must mention as well. Sorry to cut you off.
Vernacular for trying to rhyme. But I know. That's the second DJ noise I've gotten today, so that's impressive. How are we going to break down the positions? Because I don't know if we need to go like, all right, here's what a right guard should be doing. Right. Here's what a left guard should be doing. All right, so like I feel like we should categorize them. We talked a little bit about that. What did we come up with that?
So I'm actually going to turn this to Jack because you had a really good explanation.
I just got this from the 1 year college football I did play. This is just how they broke the position groups up for lifting and for the conditioning tests and stuff like that. First group is skill players. This will be your wide receivers, your cornerbacks, pretty much any back position, if you will, running backs, defensive backs. Next is what's called a hybrid, which would be linebackers, quarterbacks, fullbacks, tight ends, things like that, kind of mid-size. And then, of course, the most important, saving the best for last, the linemen.
Yep.
Call them the uglies.
Big uglies.
Love them.
Yeah.
Quarterback ends up in a hybrid.
I guess, and this is the point we can talk about a little later too.
Can we separate quarterback?
It depends on. I mean, it totally depends on play style, I think. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess if you're more of a running quarterback, if that's how you're effective on the field, it makes a little more sense to train skill movements.
Yeah.
But if you're more of a pocket passer, a little Pillsbury throw boy, I feel like you might be able to get away with some more.
One of the greatest nicknames in all of sports.
You can't beat it.
Was that the Kentucky quarterback?
Mhm.
Yeah.
He wore like 22. I love
I
when.
think he died.
Really?
That sucks.
Yeah, if he
Rest
has,
in
then
peace.
yeah, rest in peace for sure. But
All right.
Jared
Pillsbury
Lorenzen,
Doughboy.
Yeah, that's him.
is that who it was?
Legend.
Dude, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's a throwback
I know,
reference right
yeah.
there. I was going to say, I haven't thought of that
Pillsbury
in a
throw
long
boy,
time.
the hefty lefty, because he was left-handed, right?
Exactly. You
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
God. Dang,
Yeah.
Jack, bringing it back. I like it.
I'm telling you.
That's good stuff.
Apologies to everybody if he is still alive.
Yes,
which I
that-
really hope is the case, but for some reason I feel like it's not. But
He's probably listening right now, being like, "What the hell? I'm still alive."
Well, then he
Come
just
on."
needs to comment and just
Yeah.
like, share, and subscribe.
Get him on.
But yeah. So I would like to separate the because I think that we can talk about that differently. Gentlemen, where do you guys want to start?
Dude, I think quarterback guru should start us off with quarterback. How about that?
Yeah, let's start
Yeah.
with quarterback. Yeah, let's
So
get
we're
right-
talking like lifts specifically, or just generally exercises?
I think exercise.
I say generally exercises. So
Cool.
I think that we should take this and we should assume that they are now a more advanced mover, right? They're good at all their core lifts. They can do that. They're not crazy asymmetrical. They don't have like all these crazy mobility problems. So we're not going to be like, oh, you need to do a single leg hamstring stretch, right?
Right.
We're not going to get into that. And then change our voices too as well. So we're not going to do that either. But yeah, so
Quarterbacks.
more advanced movements that are going to help in the position specific.
Yeah, I think like lateral bounding in terms of getting depth with drops and stuff like that is really important. What's really often overlooked with quarterbacks is the ability to transfer your weight. So stuff like single leg hop is a great exercise. I feel like that's really kind of basic, but just embodies all the principles you want. I mean, you want to be able to load and be able to explode in a really short period of time. They have really cool graphics in the NFL now that track like release and how long it takes quarterbacks to get the ball out and stuff like that. So just to be able to move efficiently through those ranges of motion and have your weight on balance to let it fly whenever you want to, especially at higher levels, is absolutely necessary. And off of that,
That's a really good point.
I know, I was gonna
Continue.
say, I haven't thought of that one at all.
Quarterback guru, knower of all things. That makes-
well,
see?
it's something I definitely struggled with, and especially a lot of younger kids, maybe even high school athletes, as they're going into their body, that proprioception, that weight distribution is definitely a little off. So once you can hone in on that, you can really start to put a lot of zip behind your throws, and I think that's really important. But on that zip behind your throws point, rotation through extension, things like, I can't remember, of course, it's just the rotational landmine press, I guess is what you call it. I think that's a great one for throwers. And then any sort of like pal off rotation or anti-rotation exercises, I think, are really, really important too.
The rotation that Jack's talking about is through the torso, and then the extension he's talking about is through the hips. So we want to try to get mobility of our torso through use of our hips, right? So our hips are going to flex and extend, and our torso is going to turn and kind of support that power movement from the hips.
Yeah. I don't know what you all would add to it. The last thing I can think of is, of course, just taking care of your rotator cuff in your arm. Especially, I mean, that's pretty common within the baseball scene. That throwers want to do that. It's a little less common in football, so definitely something to emphasize for any young throwers out there. Take care of your rotator cuff.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think like some good like pull and external rotation movements are probably important.
You're probably you're internally rotating a lot in that
bunch.
throwing arm, right? Because you're just constantly. And I'm not very well versed on proper throwing motion for a football, so I'm assuming you're at the
You
very
even
end.
rolled the hand
You're
over.
rolling
You
the
had
hand.
the thumb down.
Yeah.
You did a great job.
Did I? Okay, thank God. All right, cool. All right, I feel a little accomplished about that.
Good.
But that leg drive and be able to transfer power is extremely important because your release time takes a lot of pressure off of your linemen. It helps with timing with your wide receivers. Being able to put zip on the ball also gives cornerbacks and linebackers that are sitting in the middle less chance to react upon the play. So all of those things, I mean, that football is a game of inches. So every inch that you gain as to your advantage is important. And that's what we're looking at, especially the higher levels you get. You're looking to gain just the slightest edge because everybody is so athletically gifted at that point, right? Each new level of play, right? Whether you're high school, then college, or pro, or whatever. So,
For sure.
yeah, I think that's a really good point. Man, that was really well done.
Thanks, sir.
Do you want to move on? Is there something else that you want to talk about the quarterbacks? Do you want to get into I think if you have a more mobile quarterback, then we would just dump them into the next group skill players.
Right.
Is that what you want to do?
I think that'd be cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you would probably do some of the same things with skill players.
Yeah. So what are we looking at? So Dan, let's go ahead and take it off with you for a little bit here. If you had a skill player that came to you right now and said, "Hey, I want a front squat," I'm gonna somehow work that into every single podcast episode.
I'd be like, "Hey, your sport is unilateral. Let's work on some unilateral explosion and balance here."
So for a skill player that comes to you and wants to train with you, right? What would be some of the things that you'd be taking them through specifically to get them better at, let's say, like either wide receiver, running back, cornerback?
I think I would want to work on deceleration, right? So I want to make sure that their lateral deceleration is really good, and then I want that reacceleration to be like amazing as well. So I'd want to work on, if I had that down to a science, then I'm going to start to work on our cutting drills, and then I want them to react to a stimulus. So I want to work on actual agility, right? So I want them to be like running at something at the last second, have to cut left or right based on something that I dictate.
So actually, I want you to talk about this a little bit more, because we talked about this when I first started at MadLab, and you talked about your definition of agility is different than a majority of people's definition of agility. Break that down for us really quickly.
So essentially, if I'm telling Alec to run, I think that there's a big difference between change of direction and agility, right? If I have Alec run at a cone and I'm gonna you're gonna cut right at this cone, and then he's gonna cut left at the next cone, then he's working on change of direction. He knows exactly what's going to happen. If I have him running at a cone, at the last second I go left, or at the last second I go right, and he doesn't know which one is going to happen, now he's reacting to a stimulus that he's not sure of. Like there's maybe only a couple options, but he's still not sure what's going to happen either way. That becomes agility. So that reaction is so important to sports, and it's often not trained, right? And then people think they're working on agility, and they have an agility ladder out. And really, they're just working on footwork, depending on how fast they go through it. Maybe a little bit of conditioning, maybe some decelerative concepts just from the constant plyometrics, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, nothing super advanced.
Yeah.
Right. And then also, once they're already good at a ladder, get them some relatable skills to the field. Get them as close to what they're going to do on the field as possible.
Yeah, and I guess to that point, progressing from change of direction, crossover step, and being able to flip your hips. I just think defensive back. I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know how you'd explain it better than a crossover step, but yeah, just the ability to be loose through your hips and be able to.
You want to be able to flip your hips,
exactly.
Well, right. So any exercises that I can get them to flip their hips and then and transfer the weight really well and smoothly, right? Can I have a cornerback go into a back pedal? Can they flip their hips? Can they sprint backwards? Then they go back into the back pedal. Can they turn and run laterally? And they do all these things in an agility setting, right? Just based on a reaction to me, a reaction to a wide receiver, or some kind of dummy wide receiver that we throw out there, right? Can they do that? Now you were working on some stuff with one of our wide receivers the other day. So I mean, you were playing dummy cornerback. Very much a dummy cornerback, I'd say. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so then he has to react to things and he has to work on specific stuff. So I would say that kind of stuff. I really want the guys that are going to go into contact. I really want them to, like my running backs, my wide receivers, my tight ends. I really want them to work on an anti-rotation through their core in a couple different positions. So I think that's really important too, and that's something that's not always worked on either.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think, for skill positions too, I think one of the things I think about as well is just that I think this kind of comes with a lot of the training that we were just talking about, as far as like the stability and the ability to cut back and forth, right? Because if you think about like ACL rehab, a lot of times you're doing like, dynamic lateral movements, right? At the very tail end of an ACL rehab, I should say. But I think that's really, really crucial as well. It's like stability through the core, but also like stability through the entire leg to a certain point. The knee, the foot, etc. Right. Excellent. So that would be something that I would kind of add on. But other than that, I think you guys can hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I would add to it, we talked a lot about, I guess, just general exercises, but lift specifically. I think to your point on just being able to stabilize through your lower body and through your core, we just going back to the unilateral point. I think for skill positions, that's probably the best thing to work on. I don't know if you would disagree at all.
So like something like a lateral lunge or a lateral step down.
That'd be great.
Stuff
I mean,
like
I
that.
was thinking just unilateral movements in general, but yeah, to your point of changing direction and just creating the correct angle, something like a lateral squat or a lateral lunge.
I want to say like I almost want to like throw in an RFE in there because I think it's great. But I feel like all these positions could, so I'm just trying to be more position specific because I feel like everybody, if you play a unilateral sport, you should be.
Yeah,
you should be.
I was gonna say all these guys are doing some type of like when they're moving on the field, their feet are in different positions and they're not. They're just sitting, squatting. So
we're looking at if we're looking at our mechanics, we're working on deceleration, reacceleration. If we're looking at our lifts, we're looking at for being specific with them, some lateral, some like loaded lateral movements, some anti-rotative movements through the core. And then our field work is a lot of agility of what that position is going to do.
Yeah. And I do want
to
add something else as well in because this is something that you see a ton of just in football training programs out there, and that's the bench press, right? And for its importance for skill positions, right? The reason I really want to throw that in there and just some ideas of like upper body movements that might be pertinent for skill positions is I don't truly think that the bench press is necessary to do constantly, right? Like over and over and over again for skill positions. The main reason for that being is like besides let's take the receiver who's going to break off of that DB who's maybe pressing on them or the DB who's trying to jam them in the first place, right? That's going to be important, but at the same time, there's a lot of different motions that could also help that same type of explosive push, right? Constantly harping on the bench press is something that I think just obviously with football training programs just gets overworked way too much for skill position.
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, if I want somebody to be able to get their hands on somebody in a cornerback setting, or if they're a wide receiver and I want the hands off somebody, I'm still going to work some of the same things, right? I want the scapula to be stable. I want stable shoulder blades. So then you are looking at some unilateral push pull and stuff like that. And then I want crazy grip strength on both sides, right?
I was going to say running backs, especially when you think about like, when
pass block.
Yeah. And then also just being able to carry the ball though, right? Like if you don't have the strength to be able to not get the rock knocked out of your hands all the time, you're going to be fumbling constantly.
Yeah.
And that's not ideal.
That bench press doesn't help that much. To your point, I feel like with skill players, the only reason I can see a bench press applying to the field would be cornerbacks and pressing, but I don't think bench press is necessarily the best.
But then you're also better. Your better use of your time would still be
power.
Power, and then just in unilateral because people are gonna still try to move your hands.
You jam with one hand, anyways.
It's not like they're just gonna like start to lean on your hands and you're gonna slowly press them away.
Right for strength.
They're gonna be like trying to knock your hands away, so you're gonna have to be able to stabilize and then like remove. So you also want to like work on hand quickness.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Prime got good because he'd be like, "Hey guys, just stay right there and just let me slow you press away." Yeah,
because his game is all about slow forward movement. Yeah,
strength.
Yeah, exactly.
So contrasting to that, let's talk about the big guys a little bit. Unless is there anything more you guys want to add on for skill? Because I think there's so much that we could talk about. There's so much,
and so then when we say that there are a lot, we're just trying to be like, all right, here's somewhat of the differences and like where we'd spend a good amount of time versus another position, right? Because again, there's a lot of these concepts that carry over into all of them, right? I mean, it's really hard to argue that you wouldn't work grip strength with every single position, right? I mean, it helps you like on all positions, right? I don't know how much grip strength a kicker needs. But I mean, man, they have to come down. They got to tackle. They got to come down and tackle.
They might have to make that game-saving tackle.
And if you get some jersey and like put somebody down, then
you love to see it.
God, you hate it on the other team. The kicker made the tackle. Come on. Let's talk about the big guys.
Yeah,
let's talk about the big guys.
Bench press. Do you think this one? I feel like this is the place where it may apply more than any other. And it's kind of self-explanatory, right? I mean, I guess.
But I would still say, I would still be with Alec that would not be one of the main lifts.
Agreed.
To me at all.
Agreed.
Right? Because then I would also want things where they're trying to do more stability of the scapula, right? I also think that rowing would be single arm, like a lot of your single arm rowing concepts would be more of their upper body volume than a horizontal press.
So that's a curious one, right? So I want you to be able to get back to your position a little bit, Jack. But like for rowing, right? I think rowing's huge. Obviously, rowing once again for every position in football. I think that's a big one. We
And
talked
also
about
human beings, because I almost knocked my mic over. That was a good horizontal push.
Yes, exactly.
But what was I going to say?
I think so. I was gonna say, thinking
we're
about
close to
like,
chain dominant as human beings anyway.
exactly.
So rowing's
Yeah.
always going to be. So go ahead.
and just from like a football technical standpoint too, like linemen obviously are going to be trying to, like let's say they actually have to pull for like a trap play or something like that, right? Like there's motions where they're going to be rowing in that type of horizontal plane, right? So it makes sense for that, right? So, but I want you to get back to the bench press for a second. So why would you say? Let's go ahead and just give you the chance to argue your case. Why would you say they should bench press more often?
Well, I completely agree that generally they should row more than they should bench press. But I think just relative to all the other football positions, it makes more sense for the linemen to do more benching, just based on the fact that their job is to hold people in place. But then to Dan's point, you're only really pressing for like a tenth of a second, a half a second max, and the rest of the play when you're doing your job holding your block is the stability and being able to grip somebody and hold on to them and get your position underneath of you, and balance your weight how you need to. So I mean, yeah, it's definitely a glamour lift, but in terms of necessity in football, I think you can kind of throw it out.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, again, you don't have to get rid of it, and I think it's a piece that every football player is going to use at some point. Wouldn't say it's like if I'm about to highlight something, it's not what I would highlight.
It's
like,
really interesting.
I want them to have crazy pop through their hands. So if they're going to do a horizontal push, I want some power. Right, I do want them to have strength that way, but if we're looking at it again, just highlighting certain movements for these guys, then let's take them and be like, all right, let's highlight something strength wise, let's highlight something power wise, and let's highlight some mechanics.
Yeah.
What do you think? And maybe a core.
Well, and just I think to your point, man, the bench press test is fool's gold. I mean, it's definitely most important to work on everything other than that.
I was gonna say it's probably worked on the most when they're about to go to the combine. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like
I hate that. That's the worst thing in the combine.
The combine is
volume. Why is it volume horizontal push? Yeah, it's stupid. It's not. And then everybody's arm lengths are different. Like there should be.
It's the same weight for different body sizes.
If you're gonna do the bench press and you're stuck on that and you want that horizontal push, then maybe like a 3-rep max where like you go up and it's almost like a competition, right? You obviously these guys aren't doing the bench press for their first time in their lives. They've been practicing it. So they should have an idea of what they're gonna hit and then be able to choose somewhat of something in the combine, right? And then based on what they lifted, that should be put in perspective of their weight and then also their arm length.
Yeah.
Some sort of equation.
Not to get too off topic too, but I love the NFL.com analysis of the bench press, and they'll just say like, yeah, this person has tons of strength because they benched 225 45 times. And it's like that only says like one
Which is
part
not even
of
a
their
measurement of strength.
Yeah, exactly.
Either.
It's just one it's one small portion of their overall strength in general too. So it doesn't even really make sense. Like,
no, it gives you a vague idea. Versus, like if somebody bench presses 225 45 times and somebody does it 28 times, then how much stronger is 45 versus 28? Right. And then the scouts will be like much stronger and like what are they? I don't think Jonathan Ogden did what, like 26 27? I don't even know if he did that. And he was like a stonewall.
Those dudes with longer arms, it's just tougher.
My favorite thing was when I first benched 225 for 6 reps and I could claim that I benched more than the Honey Badger. I was like, oh yes, finally got there.
And we saw how important that is. The guy's vicious on the field.
Yeah.
He doesn't even like his nickname.
The Honey Badger?
That is very upsetting.
It's such a great nickname.
It's such a great nickname. Yeah,
I loved him at LSU.
Yeah, he was a monster.
Oh,
for
God.
sure. I mean, he's still really good. Yeah, he's a really good, versatile piece on defense.
He has a ring from KC, right?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. But I'm glad he got it.
Yeah.
I'm glad he got it. Yeah.
Rooting for that guy.
Yeah. But back to your point. So you were talking about weightlifting for each. So if we could to kind of wrap back,
I'd rather have like for like a pure strength. If I was gonna do something pure strength for them, and I was like gonna highlight one exercise, like a low sled push.
Cool.
Right, to get some crazy leg drive with with an S ton of weight on it.
I feel like it's really sports specific.
Now we're gonna censor ourselves on that one. You said just S ton of.
Yeah, I'm saving it all
Family
for you
friendly.
guys. So then when you guys decide to curse, you don't have to feel like you hold back as
Okay.
much because you're like, all right, well, we have 3 curse words that we can say on this because I don't know how your guys' minds work, and I'm just guessing that you guys have quotas. And so I was like, I'm being charitable by letting you guys have all of it.
We appreciate
And
that, man.
everybody knows how much I love to curse. So,
Yes. Yeah. That's what took me off guard. I was just like, wait, what?
Charitable Dan, it's Monday.
Charitable Dan.
Thank you for your curse words.
Yeah, so I think the low sled push is really good, actually. That's one that I think a lot of people don't think of, too.
Yeah, they're also a
because-
shit ton of fun.
So
How about that?
Yeah, exactly. Tons of fun because they suck and they absolutely demolish you. I did sled pushes just on Monday, and I was just like, or wait, no, last week. Never mind.
Yeah.
Anyways, not the point.
Super
And-
versatile exercise, though. Something you can do for conditioning or something you can really, really load up and do
Yeah.
for some strength.
Yeah, so I would like it with them loading up for strength. Also, it has an element of shoulder stability
Yeah.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Like arms are out, like scapula is nice and stable.
Yeah.
And then they're driving that weight forward. Like I think that's really impressive.
At least aesthetically,
important.
it looks most like a football
Yeah.
movement than anything else. What lift specifically do you think is most important for linemen? I guess going back
I would
to
say
you
dumbbell row.
prioritize.
Dumbbell row is
Okay.
probably huge because especially, I mean, and then once again, I think
grip
you
work.
can use
They need
grip work. Yeah.
Big time with them.
Yeah.
If they have hands that people cannot release, if
Yeah.
you grab pads
Mm-hmm.
and the other person cannot get your hands off your pads, then you have that block.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you know
That's
well
yours.
from jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I guess you can explain how difficult it is to try to get away from somebody who's
Yeah.
got mitts.
Or you're a defensive lineman and you
Mm-hmm.
grab the offensive lineman where you want him, and then you can move him somewhere. Then you're gonna shed that block. That's
Yeah.
yours, right? You've got that win, and then it's just up to whatever's gonna happen and how you can react to whatever skill position player is that you're trying to eat for dinner.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
for a power movement, I want something where they can explode out of a stance, and I want them something they can use their whole body, almost like you're doing like some kind of like push press or something
Like
of that
triple,
nature.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is there something better?
Like
that you
a
guys can think of?
med ball triple extension press, kind of like something where
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
extending fully through and trying to drive that med ball as far forward as you can.
Even honestly,
Yeah.
if they're just doing power into like one of those like into a tackling sled,
Yeah.
or into
Yeah.
a bag, right? Or into pads that you're holding,
Yep.
and just work on like explosion through that. Or you can have somebody like you can do band resistant that way too, right? And then have them explode into something like I would want that. That's something for power, like where they can use their whole body out of a stance.
Yeah.
Right. And whatever stance they're gonna be in, likely a 3-point stance, but
You work that with landmine stuff? I mean, like...
yeah, you could work that with landmine stuff.
Yep.
So for sure, but something of that nature is something that they're like. It's gonna be how they're gonna come out of their stance, and maybe you have a little bit of variety of different ways to do it. But I want them to be able to get out of a 3-point stance really fast, and then be able to transfer that speed to like some explosive power
Yeah.
with their hands.
Jack, do you think there's anything that we're missing so far as just like, what about ambulatory motion? Like anything that in particular that you think would be important for them to know?
I think Dan's point on doing core work, specifically anti-rotation work, in a bunch of different positions.
For both sides of the line.
Yeah. I think just for football in general, because a lot of cases you find yourself on the ground or like half kneeling, or you might be in a really awkward position in just a pile of people. So, I mean, just to be able to brace your core and do something productive, because we've said it all the time, and it's really cliche, but it's a game of inches, right? Your ability to knock that guy off his path a half an inch wins the game potentially, and just little stuff like that. So
think about where you get a lot of pressure from. Like you get a lot of pressure from the edges. So think about what happens when an edge rusher comes into a tackle, right? They're trying to usually get bent to the outside. The tackle is trying to hold them in place. A lot of anti-rotation there. Also, the tackle is trying to either like push them down into the ground or bring them back, right? So then a lot of anti-rotation on the core from the defensive end or whoever's deciding to rush, if it's an outside linebacker or whatever it is, wherever your edge rusher is, depending on your defense.
So I kind of want to add in a little bit of a twist to the end of this, right? So let's go ahead and talk about the one position, the hybrid position, that I like to think about the most, because I
Punter.
think yes, punter. How good do you need to be at weightlifting for punting? No, Tight ends.
Pretty good though.
Yeah.
Tight ends. Let's talk about tight ends because I think they're such a unique position because they do, especially depending on the gameplay style of the team, right? They might be asked to do a lot of different things, right?
That's a problem with at least pro football now, is that tight ends are asked to do a lot. So it's really hard to be a rookie tight end and really produce. So the ones that do, to me, are very, very impressive because you're asked to run block. You're asked to pass block. You're asked to understand what the running back's doing. You understand what the quarterback's going to do, how receivers are going to run the routes, and then you're also asked a lot of times to be a playmaker, right? And you're going to try to take advantage of linebackers that are going to cover you, right? So you need to understand route concepts in the whole passing game. So you need to understand the entire offense almost like a quarterback.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Except for you also have to block. So,
Boy, hey, quarterbacks have to block once in a while. No. That one chop block that they have to throw. Or
only if we do something wrong. It is always nice when someone cuts it back across the field and he gets blindside somebody, but you're not allowed to do that anymore.
Matt Stafford early in his career would run out there and smash into people.
Love to see it.
I was gonna say my favorite highlights of Eli Manning or Ben Roethlisberger are when they hustle their way towards a block and they just kind of throw themselves.
Mix it up a little bit.
Right, exactly. I mean, if Big Ben tossed himself down, that would block me.
It gets in the way. Yeah. And all it has to do is a little bit of a quarter second, and that could be the difference between a 40-yard run and a loss or whatever. So.
Yeah, and just that, I guess that's my point from earlier, being able to just brace your core and generate any sort of strength from a just huge assortment of positions, I think is super necessary. But talking about variety, back to tight ends, we talked about this a little bit before, but it really has a lot to do with play style. I mean, you just talked about Big Ben. I mean, compare him with a guy like Lamar Jackson. Lamar will fall a lot more on the skill spectrum. And although Big Ben, super mobile, Mr. Outside the pocket, extend the play, his training would probably be a little different just based on his strengths, and I think that's evident, most evident in the tight end position.
If I could just improve two things on a tight end right away and make them really good at two things, it would be, I would have to say it'd be like hand strength and positioning, and then quickness.
Yeah.
Right.
If so one to catch, one to be able to block.
Yeah, and I think those would get them pretty far on a lot of teams. Right?
Especially if you can get a big guy like that quick, right? Because we're talking big bodies, right? These guys are 6'4", 260 pounds, right? Maybe even taller.
Yeah. But I think they should be able to do both. If you have a tight end, he should be able to do both. He needs to be a threat in the pass game, because otherwise you essentially just have just like a guy that can block but not as well as your offensive lineman. And when he's out there, people know he's either going to run or pass block, and they don't really have to worry about him. So then it's like, is he that much of a weapon for you? Does that make sense to you guys?
Absolutely.
So I feel like if he lines up there, if I'm on the defense, then I should have to go, oh no, I don't know if they're running or passing because Jack's out there playing tight end. And if he is going to run around, we have to cover him, because otherwise we're in trouble. He's going to make us pay for it, right? Those to me are have really highlighted that tight end position at higher levels, right? That's why Kyle Pitts went so high to Atlanta, because he can do all that stuff. He's like a wide receiver, but then he can also block. So then, and then on that side of things, if they can't block, then you're like, all right, we're only worried about him in the pass game, and we can run anybody through him if they decide to run here or whatever. So.
I think that's a broader theme in sports in general. Just being able to do a little bit of everything. You see it in baseball with Shohei Ohtani, who's pitching and leading the league in home runs, which is really unique.
It's amazing.
He's in company with Babe Ruth, so I mean, definitely an outlier in that sense. But
in the current era, which is also insane.
I'm about to say it's a way. I was gonna say, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to throw the Bambino down, right? But to me, it's way more impressive what Ohtani's doing now.
Yeah.
So especially in today's era, but. Not to get a little too much off topic. I get what you're saying.
That's for the baseball podcast.
Yeah,
that's for the baseball podcast.
Cool. Yes. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, it's kind of funny because what we were talking about, everything that we were talking about earlier, right? When it comes to skill sets for pretty much every position, besides maybe some of the specifics that we talked about for quarterback, right? Like the tight end is, hey, you got to be able to do those all pretty effectively, right? And to what Dan was saying as well, right? If you want to be good and unpredictable as a tight end, I have no idea what the Wolf Dog's doing. She just wanted the blanket off of her. Yeah, talk about tight ends right there. So
She's definitely a hybrid player.
For sure.
So it's especially to be like good and elite and above and beyond as a tight end, you have to be good at multiple different skill sets, not just average, but good, because otherwise you're going to be predictable. Otherwise, they'll know that you're always going to be running routes and essentially you're a glorified receiver. Or they always know that you're out there to block, so they're going to obviously know you're going to probably be doing some type of jumbo set run play, whatever it is, right? So you can't be too predictable. So you have to work on both sides of the game.
Which is why tight ends take longer to develop.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting position. I think it's only getting more interesting, which also brings us to me like thinking about linebacker, right? Right now, in the program especially, the college games have been doing it for a little bit, but a linebacker might be the hardest defensive position to play right now because you're having these tight ends come at you and coaches are literally going, how can we take advantage of this team's linebackers? So you're seeing linebackers that are really talented guys just getting torched constantly because it's almost unfair and people are finding a weakness there. So now we're going to have to see like defenses changes and stuff like that. What about what would you guys say for linebackers?
I think
Let's help these guys.
Linebackers are a really interesting one because depending on what type, once again, this comes back to play style.
For sure.
Right? So it depends on what type of defense that your team runs, right?
Well, let's say that we need this guy. He's going to have to cover, right? And he's going to have to stop the run.
Okay.
Let's not worry so much about blitzing, right? Some of them can do all of those, but let's worry about like coverage and stopping the run, right?
Acceleration, deceleration.
Yeah,
For sure.
I mean, I feel like a big way to take advantage of these guys is because athletes are so elite. We've referenced that a couple times. They need to be really, really quick with their reactions. And an easy way to take advantage of that is play action. So just the ability to, I guess, as a linebacker, say you bid on the run, just the ability to decelerate real quick, backtrack, flip your hips, do a nice little crossover step and get into your pass drop is, I think, pivotal. I think that's the first thing I thought of off top.
I would definitely want to work on some crossover stepping because then it's the easiest way to look into the backfield and move laterally.
Yeah,
right.
At the same time,
a lot of your lateral movement's going to matter an awful lot, and I would treat some of it just like some cornerback drills because I want my linebackers to be able to cover, and even if they're not strictly covering and they are looking for that run game, they're still going to mirror some of those movements that a DB would do as well, right?
I was going to say this might just end up being kind of me echo chambering you guys, but at the end of the day, I kind of think your reference on agility, right, is almost most important, in my opinion, defensively for the linebackers, right? Because they need to be able to react to the different type of stimulus more so than any other position, right? Because DBs more often than not are not going to be asked to protect against the run, right? Not as often, right?
Right. They usually have a specific thing that they're supposed to do, and they might have their run cues and stuff. But the linebacker generally has more responsibility that way.
Exactly.
Right?
And D-line for the most part, right? They're attacking the quarterback or backfield or whatever it is, right? For the most part. So they have a little bit more set responsibility, where the linebackers, as we were just talking about, have dual set responsibilities, right? So they have to be able to protect against the run. They have to be able to, protect downfield as well. So at the end of the day, that stimulus and that reaction to it, and what you were talking about specifically, Jack, right, where you were saying like they have to be able to like see that it's play action, cut, rotate, boom, down the field, get into that pass pro, right? So, I mean, it's tough.
I want my linebacker to be able to be agile and react to stimulus, and I want him to be able to blow up human beings.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So
explosiveness through that lower body again, right?
Yeah. I want something like where he's running up and a guard, even a pulling guard comes up and he can shed the guard, or he can even blow him up, right? Or he can blow the running back coming out of the hole. That's or a fullback coming out of the hole is trying to block for a running back, right? Or once he gets to the running back, that he can put that running back down right away.
Yeah, that's why I think those outside linebackers, those like Deion Jordan types, right? As an Oregon, just throwing that out there as Oregon guys. They're very interesting because like Deion Jordan
was drafted very high.
Yeah, number 5.
It was a very surprising draft. I remember that.
We were excited as Oregon fans. But I find those linebackers really interesting because he's outside linebacker, right, hitting kind of that D end role as well. It's really interesting because they're so lengthy, so explosive, and so strong. But at the same time, I think he ran like a 4.6 40, something like that as well.
He did,
right?
which I think is what like propelled him into that top 5.
Yeah.
Which, no offense to him in Oregon, should not have at the time, because it should have been more about just complete production.
Yes, of
instead.
course. Yeah. And I mean, like, once again, I'm biased here. And also, side note, I've seen him in person. The guy's a freak of nature.
I believe that.
Like, see, I stood next to him. He's an entire foot taller than me.
I think he's 6'6".
The ends and outside backers, I think, are just different breeds of human being. They
those
have
are
a little
crazy
alien in them.
athletes.
They're freaks.
Yeah. It's just wild. It's wild to, like, and just what they can do on the field is really crazy as well, right? But I will say he's not probably as talented. Like, for example, though, he's more of a rusher than he is like a pass pro guy.
You know, they said they did a study on this is talking about your tangents, but we talked about this earlier. But if they did a study, and one of the easiest things to predict from college to NFL is how somebody's going to be as a pass rusher, and it's based on. And obviously, their thresholds to size and athletic ability, but the main component of a really good pass rusher is production in college. So if a pass rusher produced in college and they meet some measurables and have enough athletic ability to a certain extent, then that's a pretty good chance they're going to be successful in the NFL. If they don't have production in college, good luck.
I kind of like this topic, and I'm okay with this tangent. So let's continue on it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think that pass rushing takes a lot of mindset, right? So you have to have a certain mindset, right? So it does take athletic ability, but if we have two guys with the same athletic ability, and one guy is getting pressures all the time on like 20 or 30% of his pass rushing snaps, which is wild. That's like really crazy.
High.
Yeah, that's really high. And the other guy is getting he's getting pressures on like 2%, right? And it's all about pressures to me, not just sacks, right? Because sacks at times can be like sort of luck, right? Depending on what the rest of your D-line is doing, depending on what the quarterback, where he likes to roll or whatever, right? So it's the pressures that you create and the problems that you create for the quarterback. Well, that one guy, it could be a mindset thing. It could also be the way that he studies hand placement. It could be his moves, like just his natural his natural bend and like how he uses his hands and how fast his hands are and stuff. Both of them could run 4.6s, right? Both of them could be 6'6", 265. But the one is just going to be much better pass rusher in the NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, you do get some rarities of guys that never produced in college and then they produce in the NFL, but it's rare. Like if you look across the board, most of your guys have done a lot. Were dominant in college. So not just good; they were dominant.
Yeah, that's kind of tough. I mean, you just need to be so versatile in that position. I mean, there are so many ways, to your point, to get pressures, whether it's being bendy, whether it's bull rushing, whether it's sticking your hands up and batting down a pass. I mean, there are so many ways to be effective at the D end or at the outside backer position. I feel like play style comes a lot into play with this one in terms of how you're training. But yeah, I mean, just to the point, the versatility that these guys need to, I guess, demonstrate is absolutely off the charts.
I also think that there's a ton of coaching involved on the defensive line and the offensive line, but not as much and not as broad as if you're a cornerback or a linebacker, right? So you can have an ultra athletic linebacker who's really smart and you maybe just was asked to just do one thing in a certain scheme, right? And then you're like, all right, well, I see he did this, but I know from his movement skills and talking to this guy that he's going to be able to do X, Y, and Z for us. We just have to develop him. And I think that they're already pass rushing in college, right? And on the opposite is also more true, just not as quite as true, but offensive linemen, if they were productive, so if they could stop pressures and they could kind of stonewall guys, then those guys are going to be much more they're going to be much better NFL players because of the same thing. There's a lot of coaching involved, but there's less compared to those other positions, right? And you're doing what for the most part, you're doing what you're going to do in the NFL, right? Offensive line's a little bit different too because some teams don't run out of natural pass sets, so then you have to there's a projection involved. But if you're playing on the D line, you're trying to beat a guy in front of you. Yeah. And that doesn't change. Like some scheme fits and changes and stuff, but I'm going to go into you, and if I have a motor, I have a motor. That's probably not going to change at the next level, right? If I have good hand placement, I could probably start to get better hand placement, but I might be a natural with my hands, and that's really, really important. Am I a vicious human on the defensive line? Is that a question? If it's not a question, it's not going to be a question in the NFL. Right. If it's a question in college, it's probably not going to get better, right?
Agreed.
So I would say for those reasons. Cool. I love this tangent. We could talk about this
we could
hours.
do a whole nother podcast episode on this tangent, but to make sure that we close out today on relatively the subject that we started with, right?
right. Important.
Here or there.
Ballpark.
Right? Yeah. Is there any last tidbits that you guys kind of want to share with everybody?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people when they're developing athletes, they don't. They think of things either all over the place or they just get stuck on one thing. And so I see people do a million different movements with them where they should be prioritizing some other things, or they'll just be like, my guys just move barbells with strength. Yeah. And then it's like, all right, well, both things there's problems in both, right? I think that you need to take a human being in those movements that we said, hinge, squat, both bilateral and unilateral. Can you horizontal push, vertical push? Are you symmetrical? Like those normal things, anti-extension through the core. Those should be every athlete. Once they get past that general physical preparedness stage, go, what do you do in your sport? What are common themes in your sport, right? Start to work on those things. And then go, okay, you're good at these. Now let's look at what do you do in your position? What are you being asked to do in your position? And then break it down into those things, right? Because that's always going to be, as they get more advanced, the best use of your time is breaking it down that way to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. I think the biggest thing that comes into my head immediately is not to necessarily track your progression or your ability to do a certain movement pattern by your 1 rep max. I mean, we talked about kind of avoiding that in most of the lifts, but I feel like I always just want to make that point, and I made it last podcast I was on too, that how much weight you can push one time isn't necessarily the best translation of your strength. So working more on power, working more on stability, I feel like is much more effective for sport specific, for football specifically, than any sort of 1 rep max where you're screaming really loud and the whole team's around you clapping.
That's actually a great point, because there's a lot of recovery that comes with a 1 rep max. So then if you're trying to 1 rep, like I know teams that run 1 rep max every month, right? Or they'll do every 5 or 6 weeks or whatever it is.
Wild.
Yeah, it is. And so to me, that's a waste of their time, because then the athlete needs to be recovered from that. And then you also need to build up. So then you're literally just training them for powerlifting. And it's good that they're strong, but there's other barometers of their strength. Like you could have a good idea when they're doing their strength sets of what you think their 3 rep or 5 rep max is. And you can see that going up and progressing if you're taking notes and programming on something like Team Builder. That's right. Yeah, a little plug there. A little shameless
nice
plug.
I like it.
Team Builder, you can be our sponsor too, because we love you. So please sponsor our podcast. But if you're doing that, then you can tell that athlete's progress going up. You don't need to do a 1 rep max all the time. I think that's a really, really good point.
Yeah, I mean, I would go as far to say that like the idea that person's having them 1 rep max every single month is the reason I said that's wild, is because that's, in my opinion, they're just being a detriment to that person on the field at that point. Like the amount of stimulus that it takes on your through your central nervous system, but also like just the toll that it takes on your muscles, right? Like the breakdown of the muscle fibers itself from those 1 rep maxes are a lot. So if you're going to ask them to do that consistently and then place them on a football field where they're just jamming each other and
it's just not a good use.
Throwing each other around, it's just not worth it. Like you want these guys, dude, I was listening to a podcast with Von Miller. He was talking about his off-season training routine.
He was productive in college.
He's a pretty cool dude.
Super productive. Yeah, he is a cool dude.
He's a very cool
sure.
dude. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't met him in person, but he sounds like a cool dude.
He could also sponsor our podcast.
Yes, Von Miller.
We love Von Miller.
Podcast. Denver Broncos. Think about it.
Our Canada listener is going to love this because he's a big Denver Bronco fan.
Fair enough.
Shout out to Taylor Morrison out there.
Canada listener. I like it.
Yeah, we might have multiples. They could all be Broncos fans. I don't know.
Fair enough. But the point being is that Von Miller was talking about his off-season workouts, and they were asking him how often do you bench? How often do you squat? All these things. He's like, never.
Yeah.
Never. And they're just like, wait, you don't just like max out all the time? He's like, hell no. Dude, I want to make sure I'm feeling good consistently.
You know what the worst thing about that is they'll take Von Miller and they'll be like, oh, he doesn't need to do this because he's a freak athlete. And he does this if he, and it's like, that's not the case. I mean, he is a freak athlete. However, he's being smart. Yeah. Like, that's how you really should train. Find out the best find out the best athletes and the guys that you want to replicate and figure out how they're training. And I guarantee that they're not under a barbell all the time. Right. They're not. They're being dynamic. They're figuring out what they do in their position, and they're doing that very specifically over and over and over again. Yep. I think the most important part of sports, the best ability is availability. Yeah. If your players aren't available, good luck. Yeah. And sure. I think it's a big problem at all levels right now. I think you're even looking at probably, I would say, a third to half of the NFL programs don't really have injury prevention down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's super evident. I mean, just in training camp the past couple of years, however many guys are going out, and that's the big goal. Or I guess it comes back to what's the big goal? Would you rather perform in the weight room and put up numbers there, or would you rather put up numbers in the win column? Right. Where does it got to apply?
Oh, look at that. I like that.
I was going to say,
numbers in the win column.
Some Jack Flowers wisdom hitting us right there. There we go. I like it.
Well, I think we can... I think that we can end on that one. And I don't know if you go first or if I go first, because I get this wrong every single time. And also, we do a promo every week.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. Well, guys, thank you very much for listening. As per usual, remember, if you like the podcast, if you like the YouTube, to make sure that you like, subscribe on both channels. Once again, you can find us podcast-wise on pretty much every platform that you can listen to podcasts, and on our YouTube channel under MadLab Performance. If you do like and subscribe, make sure to hit that little bell so every time we post something new, you're going to get a little reminder. Thank you. Once again, we appreciate you. Back to you, Dan.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode. Thank you kindly to listening to The Lab.